see what beautiful work that you all have done over the last month. It's been fun to see how you've taken basically a blank piece of canvas and really turned it into a piece of art. This is my little roll, so you can see how my embroidery turned out. And then when I untie it and I open it, I have my tube up here. I have my lining separating fabric inside. And I did put the little snaps on the side so that you could open them. And then if you wanted to store things in the tube, you could. It might be easy, like if you're traveling and you put your threads in there or your needles, and then you can just snap your little tube closed. And there you go. It was a great learning process as I went along, and I'm still like thinking each time I do work on this, like, what can I do better? What can I do better the next time? So there might be something in the newsletter with like a little refresher. Oh, I tried this and I did this a little differently, and I'll share that with you. Some other great things is Mitzi had this wonderful idea in that she didn't just do her embroidery, her embroidery just in one corner. She extended her beautiful embroidery all the way across the whole front of her project roll. And she used a beautiful red grosgrain ribbon to match her red trim, and then she has a red pattern fabric underneath, and it's just really, really lovely. Carolyn also did something very fun. So for her separator fabrics, she finished the edge of the fabrics with a machine, machine stitches, decorative stitches. So she has like a herringbone on one piece, and then on another piece, she did another somewhat geometric design to finish the edge, which I have to say looks a lot neater than trying to cut with the pinking shears on the heavier broadcloth fabric. So that was a marvelous, marvelous idea. Let me go get these back. Oh. So just some other samples. This is what Sandy has done so far. She's used a variegated thread, and she did a chain stitch, and it coordinates with her piping, and then she has a really fun, cheerful print that she's doing on the inside. Carolyn did a darling embroidered name and flowers, and then she's got a little needle and thread here at the bottom as well, which is just lovely. She used a beautiful Liberty fabric as her lining, and then again, she did her separator with a nice decorative stitch from her embroidery, her sewing machine. So
I can't see it close. Did she turn the edge under or just run it on the raw edge?
So it is just along the rolled edge. She used a stabilizer underneath. It's not a folded over edge, it's the raw edge.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. Let me just re-deliver these. Thank you. So my other project roll I did in just a fun checkered fabric with a little floral inside, and this is still in the works, so you can see how to insert your tube inside, but you can just see there's lots of different combinations and then ideas that you can do to finish your project roll. So this I did for my mom. Sorry, Barbara Meager, it's got the right name.
I know what your mother's name is.
Oh, is this Carolyn? Somebody's insert is, no, this is Sandy's, I think. If you pass that on, that's Sandy. So I sent out revised instructions this afternoon, and I still found something else that needs to be revised on it. But we'll go back. I'm just going to quickly go over the instructions that we did last month as a refresher and with some of the updates. So embroidery preparation, I mentioned several different ways that you could transfer your design. You could use a soft pencil on starched surface, a blue washout pen, Frixion pen, or one of the printable wash away transfer stabilizers, which Karen, I think that's what you have on yours, correct?
Yeah,
Can we show that real fast?
really nice.
So this is an example of the print-on wash away stabilizer. So she will embroider right on top of that. And then when the embroidery is done, you just soak it and it dissolves and you have your embroidery left. So it's a great way to transfer the design without a light box or trying to hold it up to a window. So we said that we talked about the placement of the design, and Susan Learn was wonderful to notice that I failed to include a 1/2-inch seam allowance when we were trying to find the quarter mark on the fabric. So I revised the directions to include that you want, when you're trying to find the quarter mark, you have to start at the edge of the seam allowance when you fold it to the center. So my little design with my name is slightly off center for that side of the fabric, but I'm happy with it. So that's all that really matters. But I did put in a little picture that there was supposed to be a 1/2-inch seam allowance there. I realized last night, and then again today, I had a couple questions. The separator fabric that I provided with the kits was the same size as what the lining was suggested to be and what the outside fabric was. But you need to cut the separator fabric smaller than your liner and your outside fabric so that it's just not hanging out and getting kind of sloppy. So you still have room to put a project here and then put a second project in. And even if you want, you could have a project on the top and then you would roll them all up. But you do want to cut your separator fabric about 1 inch to 1.25 inches on each side, narrower than your outside fabrics. So it doesn't hang out. I also found, and Barbara Meager had the same experience, why everything fits nice and flush when it's hanging like this. As you roll, the lining fabric sort of runs. So you don't want to roll it up tightly. You almost want to fold it as you go and do more of a loose roll. And you'll find as your projects are in there, they will help to fill the project storage up. And then the lining fabric shouldn't travel quite as much. Another option is if you do like tubes, heavy cotton fabrics, you could do some quilting, diagonal quilting on it. That will keep the fabric from kind of moving with you when you're rolling. So I also did 2 different ways of finishing the outside once I had turned it. One way on the linen, because the linen did have a little stretch, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't like rolling over to the underside, was that I did a little bit of a top stitch right on the side. And it's literally like 1/8 of an inch from the seam where the piping is. And that did a nice job sort of stabilizing that edge. I found right off the bat with this, which is a heavy quilting cotton, and this check is a heavier fabric. It's not like one of the farmhouse fabric, lightweight fabrics. They seem to have a little more body, and they seem to hold their shape better. And I don't think I'm going to finish the edge with a little top stitch because I don't feel like it really needs it. So that's just personal preference, whether you want to do that. I do though recommend it where the outside fabric is a lighter weight than the inside fabric because it's just going to stabilize things.
Well, could you use like fusible fleece?
That's a great idea. Using fusible fleece would be, I mean, now would you fuse it to the linen or would you fuse that to the lining?
I don't know if it matters.
Okay, so Susan Learn made a great suggestion to help with giving the lighter weight fabric a little more stability is to use a fusible fleece and either do it on one of the fabrics or the other, the linen or the liner fabric. And I think that's a great idea. And yeah, it might even help with the traveling of the fabric as you're rolling it up because it'll stabilize that. The other thing I just wanted to reinforce is that I had the lining fabric and the outer fabric at the same size as I'm constructing it because I felt like we wanted to have a little padding on the tube. And so I have my fleece also wrapping around the tube just to kind of give that a little padding and not so hard. But I did cut about an inch, a half an inch of the batting away from the area where I was going to turn under the raw edge. And this is eventually going to be sewn down onto the body of the fabric, just because it was too bulky. Would have been trying to turn the seam over. It was then going to be, you were stitching through 6 layers of fabric and 2 layers of batting. And that I think would just be too cumbersome. So I do recommend, cutting off about a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch off that one edge that is going to wrap around the tube so that it's easier to manage. I also did something different with this project roll so in the original project roll, I did not trim the seams with the 2 fabrics. I only trimmed the batting out behind it. And I feel that was a good decision because it helps to give stability to this lighter weight outside fabric. And when you run your hand down it, it just gives that edge just a little more stability. But when I'm working with these 2 heavier cottons, I felt like it was really a lot of seam allowance. So I did trim the seam allowance of both of the fabrics as well as the batting to a scant 1/4 inch, which is just under a 1/4 inch, but not quite an 1/8 of an inch. And I think that was just the perfect amount. When I'm running my hand down here, it's not too bulky or anything. So where we left off last time was that we had taken our fabric, sewn the piping on, sewn the lining fabric, batting, and outer fabric together in like a sandwich, and then flipped it right side out and pressed things a little bit. So I did a little stitching on the one project roll that has the linen. I did a little top stitch right up along the edge, but I did not do that on the cotton one. And again, you have to judge like the weights of your fabric, and also it's a personal preference. But then getting into making the tube pocket, that's where we're gonna pick up today. So if you see here, the tube pocket is the top of your fabric, and there isn't piping, because from the instructions the last time, we stopped the piping about 7 1/8 inches from the top of the fabric, because we don't need to be trying to manipulate fabric back and forth and sew a seam and maneuver around the piping. So if you see here, there's no piping in the section where the tube is. And so what that does is it gives us sort of I guess you could call it like, it's not a flange, but it does give us a piece of fabric that then we can turn over and encase our tube. And then the next thing is we would, we have two options of how we want to finish the corner. So as I pointed out before, on the linen case, I stitched the edges, one completely and the other I left open a bit so I could put the snaps on and have access to get to my nailing tube. With the other one, I sewed both edges completely closed. And the way I did this is I had marked down with my ruler onto my base fabrics 7 1/8 inches, and I've marked that all the way across, because that is where we are going to want to be stitching, folding down and stitching to ultimately. And that should be easy to find because it's right at the top of where your piping starts and stops. To sew it, oops, that hurt.
Yeah, ouch, I heard it.
So what I did then was I took the right sides of my outer fabric and I folded them in half. So I have about 3 1/2 inches on either side. So I'm making a pocket there. And I just have my little seam. I tried to make my seam so it went approximately where the seam was on the lower part of the project keeper. And then I gave it a nice press. I also, oh, I'm sorry, before I did that, I turned the raw edges up on the very end of the top there, and I pinned them together because this is going to get stitched down with the separator fabric once I have the tube inside of this pocket. Here you see I have my separator fabric pinned just above the line where the stitching is going to be. So you can see here the piping ended there, and my separator fabric is like 1 inch above that. So that way it will really be caught inside of there and won't have a chance of being pulled out. Then I flip my corners, and I like to stick my thumb on the inside and my pointer finger on the outside. And when I turn it, I want to push that corner out. And it does a pretty good job of getting most of the corner out. And then if I have my little white tool or my little purple thing, I use that to push the rest of the corner out. I did that on both sides. Another thing you could do is to fold your seam allowance over and then push it through with your finger, and then that packed seam helps to fill out that corner. So then this is what you'll have. You'll have a nice little casing, and eventually your separator fabric will be caught in the stitching. So in the directions, I have a picture of we're at step 9, making the tube pocket. I have a picture where I did a narrow hem to hold the fabrics together for the lining. And I had just top stitched that and then folded it up. I talk about, you know, how we fold the fabric, the outer and the lining back on itself about 3.5 inches. And then sewing up the unsewed side seams of each side of the top edge. So that would be what we would do on this style here. We're gonna make sure that the pocket for the tube is sewn on both sides. And I have an example of how that should look when you've stitched it. Then the option, I also went through the instructions for how to make it so you have an opening and can access the inside of the tube. With some pictures. So when you're putting your tube in, it's going to be a little snug, but you want it to be a little snug. So you push it in and you want to push it into the corner. You're trying to match up this pointy piece of the tube with the corner here. So it really sits up in there. All while navigating the pins. So, you know, you just work it in a little bit on each side, and then you just want to make sure that it's up there and that your points are standing up and that your tube is neatly in them. So then you end up with your fold over, and this little flat area that's on the fabric is where you are going to do 2 rows of top stitching. So this was much more challenging than I thought it was going to be. And I have some pictures here, and you can understand why when you look at the bottom of the page where number instruction 10 and 11 are. I tried several different feet thinking I'd get a better fit, and good old zipper foot was the way to go. I have a Bernina 5 series, and so it has like the little magic eye on there. And between that and the little screw that's on the side of the needle, it did not want to ride neatly along the side. So as a result, I ended up with a little bit of a fabric got loose and came out. I'll fix that later, but I just wanted to show you as an example. It was a very challenging way to do it. So I regrouped and took it off the machine, got my zipper foot on, and then I turned it around and I stitched it from the opposite direction. And so having the tube facing the outside of your sewing machine foot away from the screw that comes out that holds the needle and the little magic eye that was on there, I was able to more smoothly stitch. And you can see this is where I used a zipper foot, I turned it around, and actually the stitching worked out pretty nice. You did have to do a little bit of speaking nicely, and and I also found it helped to like be holding the tube as you're putting the fabric through and pulling on the whole body of the fabric to make sure that this piece that you're stitching down was separating a bit from the tube, so you weren't getting hung up by all of the mechanism on your sewing machine. I don't know if you have like a machine that has a taller bed, if that would make a difference, because it really was all of the little mechanisms around the sewing foot that were getting in the way.
Lindsay,
Mhm.
you have a zero foot.
Yes,
You try the zero foot because it doesn't have the eye and it doesn't have the, it's less complicated than the zipper foot.
right. So at the same, it would have given me the same problem because I used the foot, it's the screw from the sewing machine needle. So the screw kept banging into this. The eye was dragging on it and the screw was not wanting to get close. So when I flipped it around, the only thing that was getting in the way was the automatic needle threader. And it was enough that if I pulled a little bit and just helped it along, we were able to, get it past the needle threader. But if this was a bigger tube, there would have been no way we could have gotten it through. So, hand whipped through 6 layers of fabric and a layer of batting. And that's why I think when you see some of these project roles on the internet, like on Pinterest, they have a big tube and the caps on the end, and they've glued them on. And that could be why, it's because it won't fit their sewing machine. Carolyn?
Could you leave the tube out, sew it, and then stick it through one end?
You could, and then you could hand with the end. Yes, that's exactly right. You could do that. That's a good option. It's a great option. I'll put that in my addendum for Sandy's future newsletter.
September. Unless you want one sooner.
No, September's good.
Okay.
Lindsay, did you flatten out your tube on the one that's lying there on the, it doesn't look like it's very, no, the other one is flatter.
I did not flatten my tube out. It's just the way
That's the way it looks.
that fabric is wrapped around it and stitched down. And I think you're going to end up with the same kind of look, because this is going to be tight on here and then flat here when it's attached to the fabric. And then it's time to put your projects in there and roll them up and enjoy.
Yay.
So another option I wanted to throw up is the ties. So what our examples here today had just the ties in the center, but you could also do two ties, because maybe you've got some bulky things in here, and what's happening is your edges, sides are sort of bulging. So you could do your embroidery in the center and then have a tie here and a tie here, which you would attach the same way as the instructions were for the tool tape. And as you saw, Mitzi had a pretty grosgrain ribbon. I mean, there's lots of different things. You can make self ties. So like Carolyn could make a tie with her beautiful Liberty fabric on the linen that would look beautiful. Really, there are so many ways that you can be creative with this project, and it would make a great gift. And my mom is going to be really happy on Mother's Day when she gets this. So she'd probably be more happy if it was the apron, because her nickname is Barbara Bakes a Lot. So and the last one just fell apart. But I really had fun doing this, and I, hope you all continue to have fun with as you're making yours, and don't hesitate to send me an email if you have a suggestion as to how something could be done better, or if the directions aren't clear and there's just a way I can make them more clear. Because everybody's made some great observations and points, and I've really appreciated that. So there we go. And if you need supplies, I have supplies at a special discounted rate. But thank you all for your time.